All right, so get this. Today, we are diving deep into Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Oh, this will be good.
Yeah, you sent us this article about a character.
Okay.
I bet you haven't thought about him too much.
All right.
Haldir of Lothlórien.
Yeah. He's in.
Most people, they remember like the big names, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Frodo, Gandalf.
Right.
But this deep dive, I think it's going to reveal how important Haldir really is.
I think so too.
How he like embodies these huge themes in Tolkien's world.
Oh, yeah.
And even the movies. Even they put their own spin on his story.
That's right. He kind of flies under the radar
He does.
for a lot of fans. But when you really dig in, Haldir's story gets pretty fascinating.
It does. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
For those who need a refresher, what exactly is Haldir's role in the Fellowship of the Ring?
Well, we first meet Haldir as an elven warden guarding the borders of Lothlórien.
Okay.
It's that magical realm ruled by Galadriel.
Right.
And when the Fellowship is running away from the mines of Moria, after Gandalf falls battling the Balrog,
Right.
they stumble into Lothlórien looking for a safe place.
Yeah.
And that's where they run into Haldir.
Ah, that's right. And he's not exactly rolling out the red carpet for them.
No, not really.
It's pretty tense. Especially when it comes to Gimli the dwarf.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I remember that very distinctly. What is it with elves and dwarves?
Oh, a long story.
Why all the mistrust?
Goes way back, you see. Thousands of years before the Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
There was this incident where some dwarves got greedy for elven jewels.
Oh, no.
And things got ugly.
Oh.
It created this bad blood,
Yeah.
this animosity that runs through all of Tolkien's mythology. So Haldir's suspicion, especially towards Gimli,
Right.
it isn't just him being picky. It's rooted in this ancient conflict.
Oh, wow.
And it shows how much the elves wanted to keep Lothlórien separate.
Yeah.
Safe from all the problems in Middle-earth.
Keep it pristine.
Exactly.
Untouched. It's that desire for isolation,
Yes.
right? To protect what they have. That makes the elves so interesting. And it leads us to this cool thing the article pointed out.
Okay.
The movies, they decided to give Haldir a way bigger part to play.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What'd they do?
Peter Jackson, he really went all out in The Two Towers.
Yeah.
Sending Haldir and a bunch of elves to Helm's Deep
To fight.
to fight alongside men against Saruman's army.
Which, hold on, that never happens in the books?
Nope, not at all. Tolkien's elves, they stay put in Lothlórien.
So was that a good change or what?
Well, this is where the fans get really divided.
I bet.
Some of them, they love the action
Yeah.
and how much more important it makes Haldir feel.
Right.
But others, they say it goes against what the elves are really like.
That's a good point. I mean, seeing those elves charging into battle at Helm's Deep IS, visually stunning, but I do wonder, does it take away from what makes them so unique in Tolkien's world?
That is the big question, isn't it?
It is.
It's one of the things that makes Tolkien so amazing.
Totally.
His work makes you think, makes you interpret.
It does.
Yeah.
So what are some of the best arguments you've heard on both sides of this?
Well, those who, like the film's choice, often point to Haldir's death at Helm's Deep.
Okay.
They say it symbolizes, like, the elves' last stand, their willingness to sacrifice,
Okay.
even though they know their time in Middle-earth is almost over.
Right. It's like they're choosing to go down fighting
Exactly.
for something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Even if it means leaving behind their precious isolation.
It's a powerful idea.
It is.
And it makes his character so much more tragic.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It is a really impactful scene. What about those who say it like betrays Tolkien's vision?
They argue that by involving the Lothlórien elves in a battle so far away,
Yeah.
Jackson, the director, makes them less connected to their own realm.
Okay.
Lothlórien is supposed to be this haven, almost untouched by the wars. Sending elves to Helm's Deep, it makes them more like, well, ordinary soldiers.
Right.
Less like the mystical beings Tolkien imagined.
Less magical.
Exactly. And some even say that it diminishes the sacrifice of the men who do fight at Helm's Deep.
Okay.
Because now it's not just about their courage.
It's like the elves bailed them out.
It can seem that way.
Wow. I never thought about it
Okay.
like that. But you're right. It does raise some interesting questions
It does.
about like heroism and sacrifice.
Exactly.
In Tolkien's world. It almost makes you want to go back and reread those parts.
It does. And that's what's so great about it.
Yeah.
These kinds of discussions, they just help us understand Tolkien better.
Yeah.
Make us think more.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Haldir so interesting. He's not just some warrior or an elf.
Yeah.
He's part of these big ideas that Tolkien is working with throughout the whole story. He's almost like like a tiny version of the Elven problem, caught between wanting to be separate and having to engage with the world. But there's so much more to talk about, and I want to dig into some of the deeper stuff the article points out.
Oh, me too. Let's do it. There's so much more to uncover about Haldir.
Okay, but before we do, the article had some fun facts I have to share. Did you know Haldir's name actually means hidden hero or tall watcher? How perfect is that?
That IS, very fitting. It fits how he is in the books.
Right.
Like he's always watching, almost blending into Lothlórien.
Yeah.
But then in the movies, he's this big hero, a traditional hero.
And there's another thing for the books that I totally missed before. Haldir has two brothers, Rúmel and Orphan.
Oh, right.
They patrol with him.
Yeah, they're not in the movies, though.
I know. Probably to keep the story simple.
Yeah, probably.
I still want to know what they'd be like on screen, though.
It's fun to imagine.
Okay, so let's get to some of the deeper themes in the article, because this is where it gets good. I was blown away by how much symbolism is packed into Haldir. He's not like Aragorn or Gandalf, but there's something about him that stays with you.
Oh, absolutely. He's like a glimpse into what it means to be an elf.
I like that.
He represents some of the big themes in The Lord of the Rings.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, first, there's duty. Haldir is completely devoted to his job as a warden, protecting Lothlórien. This reflects how committed all elves are to protecting their realm.
Even though they know it's fading.
Even then.
It's almost like they're guarding a museum, protecting these precious things even though they can't hold on to them forever. It's kind of sad when you think about it. And speaking of protecting things, doesn't the movie version of Haldir, doesn't he show that struggle the elves have?
You mean between staying isolated and uniting with others?
Exactly.
Absolutely. He chooses to fight at Helm's Deep.
Right.
He's willing to leave their world and join with others.
It makes you think, when is it more important to protect the whole world
than to just protect your own people?
Yeah, that's a tough question, especially when you think about how the elves are fading from Middle-earth anyway. It's like their whole existence is like tinged with this sadness of loss.
Right, and Haldir shows that perfectly. He's a symbol of elven beauty, their grace, their wisdom, and how they're fading from the world.
It really makes you think, what would you do if you were Haldir? Facing, your people slowly disappearing and this huge darkness rising. What would you choose? Would you hide away?
It's a hard choice.
Or would you make a last stand?
For the greater good.
Yeah.
That's a powerful question.
It is.
And I think we all kind of feel that on some level.
We all have those moments where we have to choose what we're going to fight for. That's what's so cool about Tolkien. He writes about these elves and orcs and rings, but he's really talking about things we all experience. But before we get too deep into that, there's one thing from the article that really stuck with me. It got me thinking about the other elves in Lothlórien.
Okay.
How do you think they felt about all this stuff happening around them? We usually focus on Haldir, but what about those who stayed behind?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What were they thinking?
Tolkien doesn't tell us much. We only get hints, like through Galadriel and Celeborn. But Haldir, especially in the movie, he gives us this different view.
Yeah.
Imagine you're an elf in Lothlórien.
Okay.
Everything's peaceful.
Beautiful.
And then, bam, the world's at war.
Right.
The Fellowship comes in with all these stories about this growing darkness.
Oh.
And then they hear about this huge battle at Helm's Deep.
So scary.
It's a lot to take in. What do you think they felt? Fear. Duty. Maybe they just wanted to pretend it wasn't happening.
I bet some did. But Haldir, he couldn't ignore it, could he?
And not with his sense of duty. He felt like he had to do something, even if it meant leaving everything he knew behind.
And his decision to fight, it must have caused all sorts of reactions back in Lothlórien.
Oh, I'm sure. Some elves probably thought he was incredibly brave.
Yeah, making a last stand to protect their world.
Even if it meant giving up their isolation.
But others probably thought he was making a huge mistake.
Maybe they thought the only way to survive was to stay hidden.
It's like their world was getting smaller, and they had to make these impossible choices, what to keep and what to let go of.
And Haldir, he became a symbol of that whole struggle, that painful change.
That's such a good way to put it. He's both wanting peace and wanting to fight for it. And his story, whether you like the book or the movie, reminds us that even in these big stories, it's the small choices and sacrifices that really matter.
Absolutely. They're the things that define us.
It's those moments that show you who a character really is. And with Haldir, you see his duty, his love for his people, and this deep understanding of what's going to happen to the elves. He knows they can't win, but he still fights. It's pretty powerful, especially since he's not even the main character. It makes you realize that everyone, even the smaller characters, can make a difference.
That's so true. Haldir's story, even though it's short, makes us think about duty, sacrifice, and what we do when everything seems hopeless. He shows us that even when we feel lost, we still have a choice. Hide or stand up for what we believe in.
It's that ripple effect, right? How what one person does can spread out and affect so many others.
Exactly. It makes you wonder about those ripples. Like, imagine being one of the elves who followed Haldir to Helm's Deep. What were they thinking when they left Lothlórien? Were they scared? Or did they believe in what they were doing? Or think about the hobbits. They saw how strong and graceful Haldir was back in Lothlórien. How did seeing him sacrifice himself change how they thought about courage?
It's like shifting the focus from just Haldir to how he changes those around him.
Exactly. It makes the story even deeper.
Yeah, it does. And it shows that every character, even the ones we don't see much, can change the world around them.
I think that's a great place to pause.
It is.
Give everyone a chance to think about all we've talked about.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Yeah.
From what Haldir does in the books and movies to all the symbolism he represents. But there's still so much more. I'm really interested in this idea of how his choices affect everything else, both in the story and in how we understand it.
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely get into that when we come back. It'll be fascinating, I promise.
I can't wait.
Back again. Hope you've had some time to think about all we've said about Haldir. What stands out to you the most?
It really has been eye-opening, hasn't it? I think what really gets me is that tension between like staying apart and then getting involved, you know?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Haldir, especially in the movie, makes this choice to leave that safety of Lothlórien, to fight with men at Helm's Deep. What do you think makes someone do that?
It's a good question.
Leave a place that's peaceful and beautiful, to go face a battle, maybe die.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about what's worth fighting for.
You've hit on something deep there. It goes back to that struggle the elves have. They're tied to Middle-earth, even though they feel themselves fading from it.
Right.
They want to keep their world safe, but they know this big darkness is threatening everything.
Yeah.
Haldir, when he chooses to fight, he's showing both sides of that.
He's not doing it lightly either. In the movie, you can just see like the weight of the world on his shoulders.
You can't.
As he leads the elves out of Lothlórien, he knows it's risky, but he also knows it has to be done. It's a really strong moment.
It is. It shows that theme of duty we talked about earlier. The elves, especially the Lothlórien elves, they feel this deep responsibility to protect what they love. They have to be guardians, even as their time is running out.
It's almost like they're taken care of, like a fading memory, a whisper of something old and beautiful that's disappearing.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Haldir, he kind of becomes a symbol of that.
Yeah.
The last bit of elven grace and nobility.
Before they sail away.
Exactly, leaving Middle-earth to men.
Which makes their sacrifice in the books, Andy the movie, even sadder.
It does.
They know, on some level, they can't win.
Yeah.
But they still stand against the darkness. It's both inspiring and heartbreaking.
Really shows how bittersweet their existence is.
It does. You know, the article focuses on Haldir, but it made me think about all the other elves in Lothlórien. How did they feel about all this stuff happening?
Interesting question.
Did they agree with Haldir's decision? Or did they think he was nuts?
It must have been a tough time for them.
It must have been.
Tolkien only gives us hints.
Yeah, we see it a little through Galadriel and Celeborn.
Right, they have that elven wisdom.
But we don't really know what the everyday elves thought.
Imagine this. You're living in this perfect place. Peaceful.
Beautiful. And suddenly, boom, war.
Yeah.
The Fellowship shows up, telling these scary stories.
About this dark power.
Growing stronger.
Yeah.
And then news comes about this massive battle at Helm's Deep.
Far away, dangerous.
A completely different world.
I'd probably want to hide and pretend it wasn't happening.
I think a lot of us would. But Haldir, he couldn't do that.
Nope, he couldn't.
He had to act, even if it meant leaving everything behind.
And when he decided to fight, especially in the movie, I bet that caused all sorts of reactions back in Lothlórien.
Oh, definitely. Some elves probably thought it was the right thing to do.
Brave, heroic.
Yeah. A last stand to save their world.
Even if it meant giving up their isolation.
But others, they might have been terrified.
Yeah.
Maybe they thought staying hidden was the only way.
It's like their world was changing.
Shrinking.
And they had to make these impossible choices.
What to hold on to, what to let go.
And Haldir, he became a symbol of that struggle.
That painful transition. Exactly. He represents both sides, the desire for peace and the willingness to fight.
And no matter which version of a story you like, it reminds us that even in these big, epic stories, the small acts of courage and sacrifice are what really matter.
They are. They're what show who we are. And with Haldir, we see his duty, his love for his people, and this almost sad understanding of what's going to happen to the elves. He knows they can't win, but he still fights.
Very powerful, especially considering he's not a main character.
It really makes you think anyone can make a difference.
Absolutely. No matter how small their part might seem.
Haldir's story, even though it's short, it really makes us think about these big things. Duty, sacrifice, what we do when everything feels hopeless.
It does.
It shows that even when we feel lost, we still have a choice. Hide or fight for what we believe in.
And that choice, it can have a huge impact.
It's that ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
Like what one person does can spread and change so many other people.
Exactly. It makes you think about those ripples, like those elves who followed Haldir to Helm's Deep. What were they feeling as they left Lothlórien? Were they scared? Doubtful?
Or did they trust Haldir? Believe in what they were doing?
And the hobbits, remember how they saw Haldir in Lothlórien?
Yeah, all strong and graceful.
Did seeing him sacrifice himself change how they saw courage, how they faced their own challenges?
That's an amazing way to look at it. It's not just about Haldir himself anymore.
Right.
It's about how he affects everyone else.
And that makes the story so much richer.
It does. It really does. It shows that every character, even the ones we don't see much, they can change the world.
This has been a great conversation.
It has. Haldir, even though he's not a major character, he's given us a lot to think about.
He has. Shows how skilled Tolkien was at creating characters, even the ones who don't get much attention.
Before we finish, I want to go back to something you mentioned before.
Okay.
About Haldir's death in the movie being a symbol of the elves fading away.
Yeah, very powerful moment.
It is. Why do you think that image sticks with people so much?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think it speaks to something deep inside us. This idea of a noble people disappearing, making one last stand for a world they can't stay in. It's beautiful and sad, reminds us that nothing lasts forever. Even things that seem timeless.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, it makes us think about our own lives.
Our own mortality.
Exactly. We're part of this world, but we know our time is limited, just like the elves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It gives that scene a whole new meaning. Makes it about something bigger. It makes me think about Haldir's legacy, what he leaves behind, both in Tolkien's world and in how we understand the story. What do you think he represents?
Now that is a great question to think about. We'll talk more about what Haldir means when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Back again. It's amazing how much there is to say about Haldir, even though he's not a main character. When we left off, we were talking about Haldir's legacy, what he represents, both in Tolkien's world and for us reading the story. What are your thoughts on that?
It really is something to consider, isn't it? We've talked about duty, his struggle between wanting to be alone versus joining the fight, and that powerful moment when he sacrifices himself, especially in the movie. But what does it all add up to? What does Haldir's story teach us about ourselves, about the choices we make, and how we impact the world around us?
I like how you frame that. It's not just about Haldir, it's about what he means to us reading his story.
Mm-hmm.
He makes us look deeper, think about those big questions, duty, sacrifice. What does it mean to really make a difference?
You got it. And I think one of the biggest things we learn from Haldir is that even characters who seem small can have a big impact. He's not Frodo, he's not Gandalf, he's not destined for greatness, but his choices, they spread out and change other people.
Yeah, it makes you realize that everyone has a part to play, no matter how small it seems. And that even in a world with magic and huge battles, it's often those quiet acts of courage and sacrifice that really matter. It's like those ripples, right? You never know how far they'll go or who they'll touch.
And those ripples, they don't just stay in Tolkien's world. They come out to us, the readers, the people watching the movies. What about Haldir's story speaks to you? What lessons do you take away from it?
For me, it's his quiet strength, how devoted he is to his duty, even when everything seems impossible. It reminds me that even when things are bad, even when I feel powerless, I still have a choice. I can give up or I can fight for what's right, even if it means giving something up. Haldir shows us that those choices, those brave acts, they can have a ripple effect that goes way beyond just our own lives.
That's really well said. It's a strong message, and it shows how powerful Tolkien's writing is. He might be writing about elves and orcs and magic rings, but he's really exploring what it means to be human. He's asking us, what would WE do in these situations? What do we believe in? What are we willing to fight for?
And that's what makes Haldir so interesting. Even though he's not always in the middle of the action, he makes us think, makes us feel, makes us ask questions. He reminds us that even when things are sad, there's still beauty. There's still a choice to be made.
He really shows that bittersweet feeling that's in so much of Tolkien's work, knowing that everything ends, that even the most beautiful things will fade. But even in that, there's hope. Hope that even small acts of bravery matter. Hope that the world is worth fighting for, even when it seems like we can't win.
You said that perfectly. And it makes me think about all the other hidden heroes out there, in stories and in real life. People who might not get noticed or praised, but who still make those tough choices, those sacrifices that make the world a better place.
Exactly. Haldir's story reminds us to look closer, to see those unsung heroes and hear their stories, to appreciate those little acts of kindness, courage, and determination that often get missed.
It's like a call to action, right?
Yes.
Be more aware of how what we do affects others, to try and make those ripples good even when things are hard.
Yes. And to keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper into stories real and made up that have the power to change us, inspire us, remind us of what truly matters.
This deep dive into Haldor's world has been amazing. He's given us so much to think about, even though he's not a main character.
He has. He shows how good Tolkien was at creating characters, even the ones who don't get as much attention.
Well, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you all for listening and joining us on this deep dive into Haldir of Lothlórien. We've really explored who he is, what drives him, all the symbolism around him, and how he affects both Tolkien's world and our own understanding of the story.
We've looked at how he's shown in the books and the movies, seeing both how they stay true to Tolkien's ideas and where they've taken some creative liberties. But most of all, we've encouraged you to think about his story in your own way, make your own judgments, find your own meaning in what happens to him.
And remember, this is just one tiny part of Tolkien's huge and complex world. There are so many other characters, stories, and themes to discover. So keep reading, keep watching, keep talking about it all, and most importantly, keep sending us your requests. We're always excited to take another deep dive with you.